then the room in your diet for oxalate is going to be less, right? Because what we're trying to do is hopefully get the oxalate out in as timely a manner as possible. And the kidneys are usually doing the lion's share, and they only have so much bandwidth. So I can talk through my idea about how that works with the kidneys. And it's like this. Nature normally over-engineers. If we look at things like how much detox capacity our liver has, if we're eating a low toxin, nutrient dense diet, we're probably using maybe a tenth of what the liver can do in a pinch, right? So under pressure, the liver probably has about 10 times the capacity that we see with a low toxin, nutrient dense kind of diet. And I suspect the same thing is true with the kidneys. That would normally, we're probably using less than the kidney's full capacity. And maybe that's about a 10. But what I would say is that the average person, if the data at this point is correct, is making on the order of 15 to 30 milligrams of oxalate a day. And a lot of that might be coming from things like vitamin C degradation. We're not really, it looks like there's some metabolic pathways that do it, but so the amount that's coming out of our metabolism looks to be fairly small. So let's say the kidneys have 10 times the capacity for oxalate. So maybe it's as high as 300. And I'm going to guess 300 because at one point I had a 24-hour urine oxalate test done to tell me how much oxalate was in my urine, and it was 293. So I'm kind of guessing that the kidneys can get rid of a fair bit of oxalate, especially when you consider that hyperoxaluria can be diagnosed at like 45 milligrams of oxalate in a daily urine. With that said, it may be that you have a situation where if your body's producing maybe 200 milligrams of oxalate out of your metabolism, maybe that's why you're stuck with how much you can take in. And you have to add how much you take in to what's on board too. Your body's also trying to get rid of the backlog. So would you be able to eat a higher oxalate diet? Possibly, once you get rid of the backlog. And the challenge there is really your body's going to have to speak on that. So over time, my body said I felt better lower. So I have kind of naturally fallen lower and lower and lower in terms of how much oxalate I take in a day. And now I'm probably, 10 to 20 milligrams maybe. And that's on days when I'm having more plants. So I'm not even doing that every day. If the other challenge, though, is adding fat to your diet to try and gain weight. That's all about supporting your liver, because your liver will be one of the places in the body where oxalate is stored. And that's because the liver goes out into the body fluid, the cells, little cell transporters, which I usually think of as little hands, because they're going out into that fluid around the cell. They're grabbing a nutrient, they're pulling it back in. Those cell transporters, when they were going out to look for sulfate, the ending on this cell transporter where your nutrient has to fit is also a fit for oxalate. So that means those cells have pulled oxalate in. And the reason it accumulates is that the cell doesn't then expend energy to get the oxalate out. Instead, what the cell does is say, oh, I didn't get the sulfate I needed. I'm going to go back out and try and get sulfate. And so it'll do that until it gets the nutrient it needs. It could maroon 2, 3, 4, who knows, molecules of oxalate if there's been a lot of it in the bloodstream. So anything we could do which helps the body to get sulfate, that sulfur in the right form for the liver, that may also help the liver to then be able to say, oh, I've got enough energy, I'm going to get rid of some of these oxalate molecules. And so that can be very helpful. The other thing that can be really helpful is that the liver is going to secrete out oxalate, just like any other tissues do. And unfortunately, where it usually ends up in is the bile. And the bile is what we need in order to be able to digest fat. So we can have a multi-pronged thing here where not only do we need to support the liver to make bile, but we also want to essentially sweep up the bile in the colon and make sure it leaves the body. Bile is important enough to us that our bodies will actually recycle it. So it's one of those things where once you get down into the colon, the body will try to reabsorb that. So if you have something like 2 or 3 tablespoons of a low oxalate legume or some kind of soluble fiber at the end of a meal, then you basically have helped by following after whatever the liver's doing with the cleanup crew. So this is a new protocol that I'm kind of working on at the moment. But for some people who are finding either that they're not digesting well, or their guts don't feel well, or the stool quality is not good, they're either seeing the stool is too light in color, or they have too much of things, potentially like diarrhea. This business of either a little bit of a legume at the end of the meal, so it's your cleanup crew coming after with that, or even a little bit of something like psyllium fiber. Like I usually recommend it in a glass of water at the end of the meal, just a little bit, but that's your cleanup crew going after the meal. To see if we can get the bile that may have oxalate in it out, so we're not recycling that. So that is a place where I'm trying to act in opposition to that. But it's also if the body's not doing as good a job of just producing good quality bile, we're making sure it heads on its way out.